You know how every neighborhood has that one person who thinks they're the unofficial mayor? Well, our HOA Karen just took her delusions to a whole new level. She actually called 911 at 4 a.m. because I wouldn't move my Jeep from my own driveway. Picture this: it's the middle of the night, I'm sound asleep, and suddenly there's pounding on my door. When I peek outside, there's Karen in her fuzzy bathrobe, face redder than a tomato, demanding I park on the street so her party guests can use my private driveway. Now, let me set the scene properly. I'm your average homeowner who just wants to park in peace. Then there's Karen, our self-appointed queen of the subdivision, who believes her title as HOA president gives her magical powers over everyone's property. But wait, it gets better. Her guests are literally blocking my driveway entrance, preventing me from leaving if I needed to, and somehow this is my problem to solve? The audacity was already off the charts, but what happened next? That's when things went from neighborhood drama to absolute comedy gold. One minute she's knocking, the next minute police sirens are wailing through our quiet cul-de-sac because Karen decided that property boundaries are apparently a 911 emergency. Buckle up, because this story is about to get wild. Let me paint you a picture of what this neighborhood looked like before everything went sideways. Our little subdivision was built in the 1990s when developers were apparently allergic to the concept of adequate parking. Each house got a 2-car driveway and a tiny garage, which sounds reasonable until you realize that most families own 3 or 4 vehicles these days. The street parking was limited to a handful of spots that were perpetually occupied, creating an ongoing battle for prime real estate. My house sat at the corner of Maple and Oak, which meant I had a slightly longer driveway than most, maybe 20 feet of asphalt between the sidewalk and my garage door. That precious strip of land was my saving grace, especially since my next-door neighbor had a habit of hosting elaborate dinner parties that turned our quiet street into a parking nightmare. Karen lived 3 houses down in a pristine colonial that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Her position as HOA president had apparently gone to her head, because she'd started treating our neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She was the type who measured grass lengths with a ruler and sent passive-aggressive notes about holiday decorations being up too long. But nothing prepared me for her 3:30 a.m. ambush on a random Tuesday night. I'd been working late, finally crawled into bed around midnight, and was deep in sleep when the chaos began. At first, I thought I was dreaming about someone hammering nails into my walls. Then I realized the sound was coming from my front door, not my subconscious. I stumbled out of bed, threw on some sweats, and peered through the peephole to see Karen's face twisted into what I can only describe as righteous indignation. When I opened the door, the first thing that hit me was the wall of sound. Apparently, her little soiree was still going strong at 3:30 in the morning. Second was the sight of Karen in her salmon-colored terrycloth bathrobe, matching slippers, and what appeared to be cucumber slices still attached to her face mask. She didn't even give me time to process the surreal image before launching into her demands. "You need to move your Jeep immediately," she declared, as if this was the most reasonable request in the world. "My guests can't find parking, and they need to use your driveway." I blinked a few times, trying to reconcile this bizarre scenario with reality. Behind her, I could see several cars haphazardly parked, including a massive SUV that was currently blocking my driveway entrance. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wanted me to move my vehicle so her guests could park where they were already preventing me from parking. My response was simple: "No, Karen. That's my driveway." But apparently, logic wasn't on the menu tonight. She launched into this elaborate explanation about HOA bylaws and community spirit and how we all needed to work together during these trying times. I pointed out that her guests were literally blocking my driveway, to which she responded that I should simply park on the street like everyone else. When I mentioned that the street was full because of her party, she suggested I park a few blocks over. At 4 a.m. After working a 12-hour shift. The audacity was breathtaking. As our conversation escalated, more neighbors started peering through their windows and cracking open their doors. Mrs. Peterson from next door emerged in her purple nightgown, looking like she was ready to document everything for the neighborhood watch group chat. Karen's voice grew louder, her arguments more desperate, and her party guests more curious about the midnight drama unfolding. She pulled out every trick in the book: threats about HOA violations, vague references to property values, and even tried to guilt me about being a team player. At one point, she actually suggested that I should sleep in my Jeep on the street so her guests could use the driveway all night. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Karen stormed off in a huff, muttering something about teaching me a lesson. I thought that was the end of it and started to head back inside when I heard a familiar sound, the tinny recording of someone dialing emergency services. Through her open front door, I could hear Karen on the phone with 911, describing what she called an urgent neighborhood dispute requiring immediate police intervention. She was claiming that I was threatening her guests, blocking public access, and creating a safety hazard. The dispatcher's muffled voice sounded increasingly concerned, probably wondering why someone was calling about a parking dispute at 4 a.m. Within 15 minutes, the quiet suburban street was lit up like a carnival. 2 patrol cars arrived, their red and blue lights painting everyone's houses in an ominous strobe effect. Officers Martinez and Thompson stepped out, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Martinez was a veteran cop who'd probably seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable, while Thompson appeared to be relatively new, his expression a mix of confusion and barely contained amusement. Karen emerged from her house like she was making a grand entrance at a premiere, having somehow managed to trade her bathrobe for a power blazer over her pajamas. She immediately cornered Officer Martinez, spinning this elaborate tale about property rights and neighborhood covenants. According to her version, I was violating multiple HOA regulations by refusing to accommodate her guests, creating a public nuisance, and potentially violating local ordinances about community cooperation. She waved around a printed copy of the HOA bylaws like it was some kind of legal charter, pointing to highlighted sections that supposedly supported her position. Meanwhile, her guests stood around looking embarrassed, probably regretting whatever social obligation had brought them to a house party that escalated to police involvement. Officer Thompson approached me cautiously, clearly trying to make sense of this suburban nightmare. I explained the situation as calmly as possible, showing him the property lines, my parked Jeep in my own driveway, and the guest vehicle that was actively blocking my exit. The look on his face when Karen's argument clicked for him was priceless. That moment of realization that someone had called 911 over a parking dispute that could have been resolved with basic human decency. As the officers conferred, I could see them trying not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The tension was building, the neighbors were gathering in larger numbers, and Karen was doubling down on her demands with increasing desperation. #### Part 3, Climax and Conclusion. What happened next was nothing short of spectacular. Officer Martinez, clearly having reached his limit with Karen's dramatic performance, called for backup, not because the situation was dangerous, but because he needed someone to document this entire circus for what I assumed would be the station's legendary incident log. His partner Thompson was already struggling to maintain his professional composure as Karen continued her tirade, now gesturing wildly with her highlighted HOA manual like it was a sacred text. The turning point came when Martinez calmly asked Karen why she hadn't tried to resolve this matter through normal channels or during reasonable hours. This is reasonable. Karen shrieked, her voice climbing several octaves. These are emergency circumstances that require immediate law enforcement intervention. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that her emergency was the result of her guests blocking my driveway in the first place. Officer Martinez then did something beautiful. He asked her to recite the exact emergency that required police response. Karen launched into this convoluted explanation involving property values, community standards, and something about setting precedents for future HOA enforcement. You could practically see the officer's eyes glazing over as she droned on about subsection 4.3 of the neighborhood covenant. Meanwhile, more neighbors had gathered, some in bathrobes, others fully dressed as if they'd given up on sleep entirely. The Johnsons brought folding chairs from their garage, turning this into impromptu neighborhood theater. Mrs. Chen was live streaming the whole thing on her phone, muttering commentary in Mandarin that I'm pretty sure was questioning everyone's sanity. Even old Mr. Bradley rolled out his mobility scooter, positioning himself for the best view of what he would later call the most entertainment this street's seen since the great Halloween decoration dispute of 2019. The crescendo came when Officer Thompson, bless his heart, decided to fact-check Karen's claims about HOA authority. He asked to see the specific bylaw that gave the HOA president power to commandeer private driveways for guests. Karen fumbled through her papers, her confidence wavering as she realized that maybe, just maybe, her interpretation of HOA powers was somewhat inflated. Thompson, with the patience of a saint, explained that while HOA regulations could address many neighborhood issues, they didn't supersede property rights or constitute grounds for emergency police response. That's when Karen made her fatal mistake. "Well, if you won't enforce our community standards," she declared, "then you're failing to serve and protect this neighborhood." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Martinez's expression shifted from amused patience to stern authority. He explained, in words that a 5-year-old could understand, that calling 911 for non-emergency matters was not only inappropriate but potentially illegal. As his explanation continued, Karen's face went through more color changes than a chameleon in a paint store, from red indignation to pale shock to a sickly green as the implications sank in. The real kicker came when one of Karen's guests, a middle-aged woman in an elegant blue dress, stepped forward and quietly suggested that maybe they should just move their cars and go home. This simple, reasonable suggestion seemed to short-circuit Karen's brain entirely. She sputtered something about principles and standing up for homeowner rights, but her support system was crumbling. More of her guests started nodding in agreement, clearly wanting to extract themselves from this nightmare before it got worse. Officer Thompson delivered the final blow with surgical precision. "Ma'am, misuse of emergency services is a serious matter. In the future, disputes like this should be handled through appropriate channels, neighbor-to-neighbor communication, HOA meetings, or civil court if necessary. Police resources are for genuine emergencies." He then turned to me and asked if I wanted to file a complaint about the blocked driveway. The look of horror on Karen's face was better than any Christmas present I'd ever received. Before things could escalate further, the exodus began. Karen's guests quickly agreed to move their vehicles, creating a bizarre choreography as cars shuffled around the street like an automotive game of musical chairs. The SUV blocking my driveway retreated with apologetic waves from the driver. Within 10 minutes, the street had returned to its normal parking configuration, and the crowd began to disperse. The police officers lingered just long enough to ensure peace was restored, with Martinez giving Karen a final warning about appropriate use of emergency services. As the patrol cars drove away, Karen stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, deflated but still defiant. She attempted to salvage her dignity by announcing that this matter wasn't over and that she would be reviewing all HOA bylaws for future enforcement. The remaining neighbors responded with what can only be described as collective eye-rolling and dispersed back to their homes. Mrs. Peterson, still documenting everything, gave me a conspiratorial wink as she headed inside. But here's where my petty revenge skills truly shined. The next morning, I woke up early and spent exactly 2 hours researching HOA regulations, emergency service protocols, and property law. Armed with this knowledge, I crafted a detailed timeline of the previous night's events, complete with witness statements from neighbors who were happy to contribute. I then compiled this into a formal complaint to the HOA board about abuse of authority and submitted it along with the incident number from the police report. The coup de grace, however, was my declaration at the next HOA meeting. Standing before the board and our fellow homeowners, I announced that I would be donating my driveway space, during reasonable daytime hours and by appointment only, to any neighbor who needed extra parking. This gesture of actual community spirit made Karen's midnight power trip look even more ridiculous in comparison. The applause was thunderous, and Karen's face could have launched 1,000 ships with its perfect shade of mortified crimson. The aftermath was delicious. Karen lost her bid for re-election as HOA president by the widest margin in our subdivision's history. The incident became neighborhood legend, spawning countless inside jokes and a new informal rule against calling 911 unless someone was actually dying or the community pool was on fire. My Jeep remained unmoved in my driveway, a monument to property rights and reasonable hour dispute resolution. And Karen? Well, she moved out 6 months later, presumably to terrorize another neighborhood with her unique interpretation of community leadership. The best part? Her house sold to a lovely family of 4 who owned 6 cars and 2 motorcycles. The irony was absolutely perfect, and justice, as they say, was served with a side of sweet, sweet revenge.